I came to drop off my ex's things, and her mother opened the door wearing almost nothing. That is the cleanest way to say it, and even then it does not explain what it felt like to stand on that porch with a cardboard box in my hands and forget every sensible thought I had on the drive over. I had come to make a clean exit. 5 minutes, maybe less. Leave the box, say something polite, get back in my truck and put the whole short, uneven chapter behind me. Instead, the front door swung open, and the kind of woman I had no business noticing looked at me like she already knew exactly who I was. My name is Jake Calloway. I am 31. I work in construction project management, which sounds more impressive than it feels most days. Mostly it means long hours, dust on my boots, too many calls, and solving problems other people pretend not to see until they become expensive. 3 weeks before that Thursday, I had ended things with Becca Turner. It was not ugly, no shouting, no betrayal, no dramatic last scene in a parking lot. We had only been together 4 months, but even short things can wear you down when they are wrong in a quiet way. With Becca, everything always felt like it should work better than it did. She was nice enough. I was decent enough. But every time we were together, it felt like we were both trying to force a puzzle piece into the wrong place and calling it effort. After the breakup, a box of her things sat in the corner of my apartment like a task I kept postponing. A sweater, a few books, a charger, makeup in a small zip bag. The kind of leftovers that prove a person was in your life without proving they belonged there. I texted her more than once about picking it up. She said she would. Then she did not. After 2 weeks of that, I decided I was done waiting around for people to follow through on simple things. So after work on Thursday, still in my boots and a gray shirt with dust on the sleeves, I loaded the box into my truck and drove 40 minutes south to the house where she had moved in with her mother after her lease fell apart. Becca had mentioned the house before. Big yard, quiet street, older place but well kept. She talked about it like a temporary stop. Somewhere between one life and the next. I did not think much about her mother except in the vague way you think about someone you have heard about but never met. I pictured a woman in her 50s with reading glasses and an apron, maybe someone who said things like "make yourself at home" while already putting coffee on. I was wrong in a way that knocked the air out of me. I knocked once. Slow footsteps came from inside, not rushed, not annoyed, just calm. Then the door opened. Lynn Turner stood there in a short silk robe, tied loosely at the waist, bare legs catching the warm porch light. Her auburn hair was damp at the ends and loose around her shoulders like she had just come from the shower. She did not jump. She did not clutch the robe tighter. She just looked at me with clear light brown eyes and said, "You must be Jake." I should have said something normal. Instead, my brain stalled out so hard I almost forgot my own name. "Yeah," I said finally. "Yes, I am." Her mouth curved like she found that mildly charming and not pathetic, which was generous of her. She opened the door a little wider and told me Becca had gone to the grocery store and would not be back for about an hour. Then she asked in the calmest voice imaginable if I wanted to come in and wait. Every good decision I had ever made in my life should have lined up right then and told me to leave the box by the door and go home. Instead, I stepped inside. The house felt warm in a way that had nothing to do with heat. It smelled faintly like soap and lemon and something cooking from earlier. The entryway opened into a living room that looked lived in without being messy. Real plants by the window, a stack of books on the side table, a half-finished puzzle near the couch. There was something about the place that made it feel settled, like the person inside it knew how to build comfort and had done exactly that. Lynn disappeared down the hallway for a minute and came back changed into jeans and a cream-colored shirt with the sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her hair was still damp, brushed back from her face now, and somehow that made her look even better. Less startling, maybe, but more real. She carried 2 glasses of sweet tea and handed one to me like this had already become a normal visit. "Sit," she said, nodding toward the kitchen table. I sat. There was nothing flashy about her kitchen. Small wooden table, white cabinets, a bowl of peaches on the counter, a radio near the sink that looked old enough to have stories, but the room had that same feeling as the rest of the house, steady, warm, honest. She asked how long I had been with Becca. I told her 4 months. Lynn nodded slowly like the number confirmed something she had already guessed. That sounds about right. I looked at her over my glass. Is that good or bad? Took a sip of tea before answering. Neither, just informative. That made me laugh before I meant to. She smiled at that, not a big smile, just enough to show she had noticed. Then she asked what I did for work, and when I told her, she did not just nod politely and wait for the topic to change. She asked what kind of projects. She asked whether I liked it. She asked how someone my age ends up staying in a job that starts as a summer gig. And when I answered, she listened in a way that made me realize how rarely people actually do. I asked about the puzzle in the living room because I needed something safe to look at besides her face. She told me it was a map of the national parks and that she had been working on it for 3 weeks because pieces kept slipping under the couch. I am good at puzzles, I said. She raised one eyebrow. I doubt that. I smiled despite myself. Why? Because men who are actually good at puzzles do not announce it that fast. That got a real laugh out of me, the kind you do not plan, the kind that comes from being caught off guard by someone smarter than you expected and liking it. Time started moving strangely after that. We kept talking about work, about small towns, about how city traffic makes decent people mean, about her landscaping business, which she had started after her divorce 2 years earlier. She spoke about it plainly, but there was pride underneath it, the quiet kind that comes from building something with your own hands after years of letting other people set the rules. At some point her phone rang. She glanced at it, answered, and after a short pause said, "That is fine, take your time." When she hung up, she looked at me over the rim of her glass. "Becca says the store is a mess. She will be another hour, maybe more." I should have stood up then. I should have said no problem. Leave the box, tell her I stopped by. Instead, I stayed exactly where I was, sitting at Lynn Turner's kitchen table, holding a glass of sweet tea I never asked for, already knowing this had stopped being a simple drop-off a long time ago. I stayed because leaving suddenly would have felt more obvious than staying. That is what I told myself anyway. The truth was simpler and harder to admit. I did not want to leave. There was something about Lynn that made the room feel different. Not charged in some wild, dramatic way, just clear, like I had walked into a place where I did not have to perform being fine for once. She stood up and opened the refrigerator. "I can heat something up if you are hungry." I looked at the clock on the stove more to buy time than because I cared what time it was. "You do not have to do that." She glanced back at me. "Jake, you are sitting at my kitchen table drinking my sweet tea." We crossed the line between easy and inconvenient a while ago. I laughed again and leaned back in the chair. "That is fair." She pulled out a container and set it on the counter. "Chicken and rice, nothing impressive." "Honestly, that sounds better than anything I was going to eat tonight." She looked over her shoulder, amused. Which was, I thought about lying. Probably takeout in my truck while pretending I made good choices. That sounds depressing. It usually is. She shook her head and started moving around the kitchen with easy confidence. Not rushed. Not trying to entertain me, just doing what needed doing. I watched her open cabinets without thinking about where anything was, watched her slide food into a pan and turn on the oven light, watched the house settle around us as the evening darkened beyond the kitchen window. There is an intimacy to watching someone move through their own space. It tells you things they do not say. Lynn was organized without being rigid, comfortable without being careless. She had the kind of quiet self-possession that made everything she did seem intentional, even the small things. I got up to bring our glasses to the sink, mostly because I needed an excuse to move. She looked at me when I stood. "You do not have to help." "I know," I said. "I am trying to look useful." That earned me a soft smile. "You are doing fine." There was that word again. Fine. It sounded different when she said it. Less like a shield, more like a measured observation. I was still thinking about that when she asked if I wanted cornbread with dinner. "That depends," I said. "Are you one of those people with very strong opinions about how it should be made?" Her eyes narrowed in mock suspicion. "I am exactly one of those people." I leaned one shoulder against the counter. Then I should probably hear the rules. She pointed a wooden spoon at me. "No sugar." I stared at her. "That is your strong opinion. That is the correct opinion." I laughed. "That is going to upset half the South. They are free to be wrong." I do not know why that got me as much as it did, but it did. Maybe because it was so matter-of-fact. Maybe because she said it like someone who had spent enough years giving ground and had decided at least a few things in life would be held firmly, whatever the reason. I found myself smiling at her in a way I had not smiled at anyone in a while. Dinner was simple, the way she promised. Chicken and rice, green beans, cornbread that she insisted proved her point. We ate at the little kitchen table while the sky outside turned fully dark, and somewhere between her telling me about a client who wanted a low-maintenance yard while also demanding flowers that needed constant attention, and me telling her about a subcontractor who once ordered the wrong windows for an entire office building, I forgot why I had come. Not Becca exactly. I did not forget her existence, but I forgot the awkwardness of it. The box by the front door. The strange setup of eating dinner with my ex's mother while waiting for my ex to return. For a while it just felt like dinner. Like two people who had somehow started talking and had not found a reason to stop. Lynn was easy to talk to in a way that did not make sense. Not because she filled silence. She did not. She let quiet sit there when it wanted to. But when she asked something, she asked it like the answer mattered. And when I answered honestly, she did not rush to smooth it over or turn it into something smaller. At one point she asked, "Did you care about Becca?" It was such a direct question that I could have dodged it, but somehow with her I did not want to. "I cared," I said. "Just not enough." Lynn nodded once. No judgment, no fake surprise. That can be harder than anger. I looked at her. "Why do you say that?" She folded her napkin and set it beside her plate. "Because anger gives you a clean story. Not enough is messier, harder to explain to yourself." That landed harder than I expected. I sat back in my chair and looked down at my plate for a second. That is uncomfortably accurate. I have had practice. She did not say more. And I did not push. But I stored that away with everything else she said that felt small on the surface and heavier underneath. By the time headlights cut across the kitchen window, we had been sitting there long enough that the plates were empty and the conversation had settled into that warm, familiar rhythm people usually take longer to find. Lynn glanced toward the window. "That will be her." Something in me tightened. The box. Right. The actual reason I was there. A second later I heard the front door open. Grocery bags rustled. Footsteps stopped. Becca appeared in the kitchen doorway and stared at us like she had walked into the wrong house. Her eyes went first to me, then to her mother, then to the two plates in the sink. She did not say anything right away, and in that silence I became painfully aware of how this looked. Finally she asked, "Did you two eat dinner together?" Lynn did not move. "Yes." Becca blinked. "Okay." She set the grocery bags down slowly, and I could almost see her mind trying to sort through the picture in front of her, me at the table, her mother calm as ever, the empty glasses, the easy air in the room. None of it fit whatever she expected when she left for the store. I stood up. "I should go." Becca looked at me then, really looked at me. Not angry, not hurt exactly, more confused than anything else. Like she had missed something without knowing what it was. "You could have just left the box," she said. I nodded. "Yeah, I could have." Lynn said nothing. That somehow made everything sharper. I walked to the entryway and picked up the box. Becca stepped forward to take it, and for half a second our fingers touched against the cardboard. It felt like closing a file. No spark, no regret, just done. "Thanks," she said quietly. "You are welcome." That should have been the end of it, clean enough. But when I turned toward the front door, Lynn was already there opening it for me. The porch air was cool against my face after the warmth inside. I stepped out, and as I did, the porch light flickered twice overhead. I glanced up automatically. Loose wire casing near the fixture, slight exposure by the edge. The kind of thing I noticed without trying because construction had trained my eyes that way. "You have got a wiring issue up there," I said. Lynn followed my glance. "Do I?" "It is minor now. Won't stay that way." She looked from the light to me. "I will add it to the list." There was a pause then, small but full. "Thank you for dinner," I said. She leaned one shoulder against the door frame. It was no trouble. Maybe it was the porch light. Maybe it was the way she looked at me like she knew I was still thinking about staying. Maybe it was just that something had already shifted and both of us felt it. Whatever it was, when I reached the first step, I turned back. She was still watching me. "Drive safe, Jake," she said. I nodded, got in my truck and pulled away. but halfway down the street with the house shrinking in my rearview mirror, I realized I was not thinking about my ex at all. I was thinking about her mother. I told myself I was not going back. That thought stayed with me all the way home Thursday night, stayed with me while I kicked off my boots by the door. While I stood in my kitchen staring at a sink full of dishes I had ignored for 2 days, while I got into bed and turned onto my back and looked at the ceiling like it might help me make sense of anything. I was not going back because there was no good reason to. Nothing inappropriate had happened. We had eaten dinner, talked for too long, and then I had left. That should have been all it was. But there was something about Lynn Turner I could not shake loose. It was not just that she was attractive, though she was. Anyone with eyes could tell you that. It was the way she listened without trying to fix what you said. The way she held silence like it was not something to be afraid of. The way every sentence out of her mouth seemed plain at first, and then stayed with you longer than it should have. By Friday morning, I had already replayed 3 separate moments from her kitchen, and none of them had anything to do with the robe. I went to work and buried myself in it the way men do when they want their thoughts to behave. I took calls, reviewed drawings, answered an email from a subcontractor who kept pretending deadlines were flexible, walked a site for an hour under a gray sky that threatened rain but never quite committed. I was productive, useful, entirely normal from the outside. Inside, every now and then, my mind drifted right back to a small kitchen in Clover Hill, and a woman who had made chicken and rice feel like a conversation I had been waiting on without knowing it. By Saturday morning, I was at the hardware store picking up supplies for a deck repair I had promised my friend Greg I would help with. I was standing in the electrical aisle comparing fixture parts when I remembered the porch light at Lynn's house flickering over my head as I walked out. Loose wire casing. Slight exposure. Nothing urgent, but not nothing either. The kind of thing that would stay minor until the first bad rain turned it into something worse. That was a real reason to go back. I held onto that thought harder than I should have. It was clean, practical, safer than admitting I wanted to see her again and had been looking for an excuse since Thursday night. I put the deck supplies in my basket. Then I added wire caps, a new section of casing, and a small connector kit for a porch light I had no business thinking about. After that, I walked past the coffee counter near the front of the store and bought 2 cups to go. That part made the lie harder to maintain, even to myself. I did not call first. I drove out there around mid-morning with the parts in a small bag on the passenger seat and 2 coffees in the cup holder between us like the truck expected company. The street was quiet when I pulled up. The yard looked different in daylight, bigger, more open. The flower beds near the walk had been recently trimmed and the front shrubs had the kind of shape that came from someone paying attention. I noticed things like that more around Lynn's house. It was not just maintained, it was cared for. I knocked once. When the door opened, Lynn stood there in paint-stained jeans and a worn flannel shirt that was too big on her. The sleeves were pushed up past her elbows. There was a faint streak of pale blue paint on one forearm and a small dot of it near her jaw. She was holding a brush in one hand and looking at me with an expression that started neutral and shifted slowly into something amused. Her eyes dropped to the bag in my hand, then to the coffee. "You came back," she said. I lifted the small hardware bag a little. The porch light. I noticed the wire casing was loose. Leaned one shoulder against the frame and studied me for a second. And the coffee. I looked at the cups. There was no decent answer left. That one is harder to explain. That got a smile out of her. Real, quiet, and just crooked enough to feel earned. She stepped aside to let me in. "I am painting the spare room," she said. "Try not to touch anything unless you want to become part of the project." The house smelled like paint and coffee and something citrus underneath both. I followed her down the hall and stopped at the doorway of a room at the back. The walls were already a soft pale blue, one side still drying. Furniture had been dragged into the center and covered with drop cloths. A radio on the floor played low jazz that sounded older than both of us. "You are doing this alone?" I asked. She dipped the brush into a tray without looking at me. "That is usually how alone works." I smiled despite myself. "Right." I set one coffee on the small table by the hall and went back out to the porch light. It took less than 20 minutes to fix. The casing had cracked near the bracket, and the exposed section only needed a new connector and a proper seal. A small job, nothing special. But Lynn came out with her coffee and sat on the top step while I worked, and that turned it into something else entirely. She did not make small talk just to fill the air. She sat there in the morning light, one boot on the step below her, coffee in both hands, and let the silence stay easy between us. Every so often I looked over and found her watching the yard or the street or me for half a second before looking away. It should have felt awkward. It did not. It felt like we had both agreed not to ruin something simple by talking too much around it. When I finished, I stood up and brushed my hands off. "You are good now." She looked up at the light, then at me. "I believe you." That did something to me I was not prepared for, not because it was flirtatious. It was not. It was just trust lightly given. But maybe that was exactly why it landed the way it did. I carried the tools inside to wash my hands, and when I came back down the hall, Lynn was in the spare room again working on the trim. I stopped in the doorway. The second wall still needed another coat. "Want help?" I asked. She kept painting for a second, then said, "I do not need help." I figured. She glanced over at me, eyes calm. "Then why did you ask?" I looked at the roller on the drop cloth. "Because I wanted an excuse to stay a little longer." For a moment she said nothing. Then she set the small brush down in the tray and nodded toward the roller. "That wall still needs a second coat." That was all the permission I needed. We painted together in the kind of quiet that usually takes longer to reach. She moved around the room with an easy certainty, and I found myself matching her pace without thinking about it. We did not bump into each other. Did not apologize every 30 seconds the way people do when they are not used to sharing space. We just worked. Every now and then she crossed behind me or reached past me for the tray, and each small movement sharpened my awareness of her without making me tense. If anything, it made me calmer. At one point, while I rolled the paint up the wall in slow, even passes, she asked, "How are things really going?" Not "how are you doing?" Not one of those questions that invites a smile and a lie and a fast subject change. "How are things really going?" I kept my eyes on the wall. That is a bigger question than the roller deserves. Humor me. I let out a breath and thought about giving her the easy version. Work is fine. Life is busy. Same old thing. But she had a way of making that kind of answer feel useless before you even said it. So I told her the truth. I told her that work was solid, but most days felt like moving dirt from one pile to another. That I kept doing what made sense because it was easier than stopping long enough to ask whether any of it still meant something. That ending things with Becca had not hurt the way a breakup should hurt, and that bothered me more than the breakup itself. Because it made me wonder how long I had been showing up halfway in my own life. The room stayed quiet after I finished. I kept the roller moving, slower now. Then Lynn said, "That feeling has a shape." I looked over at her. "Does it?" She nodded once, brush still in her hand. "It is what happens when you keep choosing what looks right from the outside and do it for so long that you forget to ask whether it feels right when you are the one living it." The words hit me so cleanly I stopped rolling. Just stood there with the handle in my hand and stared at the pale blue wall like maybe it had become a mirror. That was exactly it. Not close. Not kind of, exactly. "How do you know that?" I asked. She looked at me then, really looked at me with no performance in her face at all. "Because I lived inside it for years." She did not make it dramatic. That somehow made it heavier. I turned back to the wall and finished the last strip of paint while her sentence settled somewhere deep. When we were done, we moved the furniture back from the center of the room and stood in the doorway looking at the finished walls. "Better," she said quietly. "A lot better." She folded her arms loosely and leaned against the frame. "Lunch." There was no pressure in it, no careful tone, just an offer, plain and simple. I followed her to the kitchen. Lunch was tomato soup from a can and toast with sharp cheddar melted on top. Nothing fancy, and maybe because it was simple it felt more personal, like she was not trying to host me. She was just feeding me because I was there. We sat at the same small table as Thursday, and for a while the conversation stayed easy. Her landscaping business. A client she was trying to win over. The challenge of getting people to trust taste they paid for. I told her that most people did not really want an expert. They wanted someone to agree with the bad idea they already had. She smiled into her soup. You understand people better than you let on. That is not always a compliment. No, she said, looking up at me. It is not. Her phone lit up on the counter beside the sink. She glanced at it and something in her posture changed. Barely. Just a small tightening in the shoulders. She turned the phone face down and kept eating. I did not ask, I just noticed. A few minutes later it lit up again. This time she reached over and turned it completely over so the screen faced the counter. For a second neither of us said anything. Then she set her spoon down and looked at the table instead of me. There are still things in my life I am sorting through. The room went very still around that sentence. She kept her eyes lowered. I want you to know that before this goes any further. I put my own spoon down. What is this? That made her smile, but only a little. If I knew that already, I would probably be less cautious about it. I looked at her for a long second, the paint on her sleeve, the quiet tension she was trying not to show, the way she was being careful without stepping back entirely. I am not in a hurry, I said. Her eyes lifted to mine then, searching for something. I did not know exactly what she was looking for, but I knew not to crowd the moment with promises I had not yet earned the right to make. After a few seconds, she nodded once. Okay. We finished lunch without forcing the subject any further. I left an hour later with a little blue paint on my left sleeve and the clear understanding that I had stepped into something that was no longer accidental, and for the first time in longer than I wanted to admit. That did not scare me nearly as much as it should have. She called me first the next time. That was the part that surprised me most, not because I thought she would not. By then I already knew there was something real building between us. But Lynn did not seem like a woman who reached for people lightly. She seemed like someone who had spent years learning to hold her own weight, someone who only asked when the need was real. So when my phone lit up Tuesday evening with her name on the screen, I sat in my truck for one full second before answering. Hey, I said. There was a short pause, then her voice, calm but not casual. The back gate is stuck. I leaned back in the seat. That sounds serious. It would be less serious if I did not have a client walkthrough tomorrow morning and several planters I need moved into the yard tonight. I smiled before I meant to. Have you tried lifting the gate while pushing it? Yes. Any change? No. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make her wait for it. Jake, yes. Are you asking questions because you enjoy sounding useful or because you plan to come help me? That got a laugh out of me. I am 5 minutes away from a burger I do not actually want. I can be there in 20. She was quiet for half a beat, then softer, okay. I got there just before 8. The sky was deep blue, that in-between hour where the day is mostly gone but the dark has not fully taken over yet. Lynn was already in the backyard in work boots and a light jacket, standing beside several ceramic planters lined up near the fence. She looked over when I came through the side gate, and there was something in her face I liked too much. Relief, maybe. Not dramatic, just real. I crouched by the gate and checked the bottom edge. Swollen from the rain, I said. Wood expanded into the frame. That sounds fixable. It is. I went to the truck for a hand plane and got to work. She stayed nearby, moving the planters into place one by one, stepping back, adjusting them, moving them again. She had a way of working that was careful without looking hesitant, like she could see the finished shape of something before it existed and trusted herself enough to keep going until the outside matched the picture in her head. I found myself watching her between passes on the gate, not just because she was beautiful, though she was. It was more than that. It was the way she moved when she was focused, the way she made small choices without apologizing for them, the way she had clearly built a life where she handled things herself, even after years of being made to feel smaller than she should have been. The gate swung clean about 20 minutes later. She tested it twice, opening and closing it with one hand, then looked at me. That was fast. The rain did most of the damage, I said. I just argued with the wood. Her smile came easy that time. You should put that on a business card. I put the tool away and came back. Need help with anything else? She pointed to a large planter by the shed. That one goes in the corner. I moved it where I thought she meant. She stared at it for a moment. 4 inches to the left. I looked at her. That exact. I slid it over. She studied it again, then nodded. Better. I folded my arms. You are hard to impress. She looked at me from the corner of her eye. That is not true. I am just careful with praise. We stood there for a moment, both looking at the yard. The setup really was good. Clean, balanced, thoughtful. The kind of thing that looked effortless because someone had worked very hard to make it seem that way. It looks great, I said. She glanced at me. Thank you. She did not brush it off. Did not turn it into a joke. She just accepted it. I liked that too. I should have left then. The job was done. It was getting late. But she asked if I wanted to sit on the back porch for a few minutes, and there was nothing in my life I wanted more. We sat in two low wooden chairs facing the yard. She had a glass of water. I had nothing. The kitchen light behind us cast a soft glow over the porch steps and the planters beyond. The whole place smelled faintly of damp soil and cut leaves. After a while she said, "You say fine a lot." I looked over at her. "Do I?" "Yes." I smiled a little. "That bothers you." "It interests me." I leaned back in the chair. "What do you think it means?" She took a sip of water. "I think you use it like a door." That sat between us for a second. "A door to what?" I asked. "Keep people from getting further in than you want." I looked out at the yard again. Somewhere down the street a dog barked twice and stopped, then twice again, like it was trying to work up the courage to say something that mattered. "What if I do not know how to answer honestly?" I asked. She turned in her chair toward me. "Then start there." I let out a slow breath. There was no reason to tell her the truth except that she had made lying feel useless. "I am not fine." I said, "I have not been for a while, but I am better when I am here." The second I said it, everything sharpened, the air, the silence, her face. She held my gaze and answered so softly I almost missed it. "Me too." That was it, 2 words, no big speech. No rescue from the weight of them, just the truth, set down gently between us. Headlights swept across the side of the house before either of us could say anything else. Lynn straightened in her chair. I saw the shift in her immediately, small but unmistakable. The side gate opened a second later, and a man walked into the yard like he belonged there. He was in his late 50s, maybe early 60s, broad across the shoulders, dressed too neatly for an unplanned visit. He stopped when he saw me. His expression changed without fully cracking. It was the kind of face men wear when they are used to having control and do not like being surprised. Lynn stood up. "You should have called." His eyes stayed on me a second longer than necessary before shifting to her. I was nearby. His tone was smooth, his eyes were not. He asked who I was. Lynn answered before I could. "A friend." He fixed the gate. The man looked at the gate, then back at me. That was nice of him. The words were polite, the meaning was not. I stood and introduced myself anyway. He shook my hand like he was testing something. I matched the pressure and let go first because I was not interested in turning it into a contest. Lynn stayed standing between us, not physically, but in the way that mattered. He said his name was Robert, though by then I had already figured out exactly who he was. He said he wanted to talk about the house, about an account still tied up from the divorce, about something his lawyer had mentioned. The explanation sounded prepared. Lynn listened to it like she had heard versions of it before. "You need to call before showing up," she said. He gave her a thin smile. "I will try to remember that." The word try landed wrong on purpose. He stayed for maybe 10 minutes, not long enough to say anything openly ugly, long enough to leave a smell behind. Ownership. Habit. The assumption that he could still enter her space when he felt like it and make everyone else adjust around him. When he finally left, I heard his car back out and disappear down the street. Lynn sat again and let out a breath she had clearly been holding the whole time. "That was my ex-husband," she said. "I had a guess." She looked down at the glass in her hands. "He does this. Shows up when he wants to remind me he still can." I did not rush to fill the silence after that. I did not say anything stupid like he seemed like a jerk after 8 minutes in the yard. She knew what he was. She had lived it. She did not need me performing outrage for her benefit. After a while I asked, "Does it still work?" She thought about that before answering. "Less than it used to." I nodded. "Good." That made her look at me, really look at me, and I think what mattered was not the word, it was that I had not made it bigger than she did. After another minute she said, "You did not have to stay." "I know, but you did." "Yeah." The night settled around us after that, quiet and patient. No rush, no pretending, Just both of us sitting there in the dark backyard, smelling the rain still trapped in the wood and the earth and the old fence. When I finally stood to go, she walked me to the front door. She leaned against the frame the same way she had the first night I met her, arms loosely crossed, face calm, but something behind her eyes had changed. It was not caution anymore. Not exactly. It was decision. "He is going to be a complication," she said. I looked at her. "I can handle complicated." She held my gaze for a long second. "Come back Saturday. I will make dinner this time, a real one." I smiled. "I will be here." Saturday came and I showed up at exactly 6 with a bottle of wine I had spent too much time choosing and a calm expression I had spent all week practicing. Lynn opened the door in a dark green dress that was simple enough to be dangerous. Clean lines, bare arms, hair down. No effort that showed, which probably meant enough effort to destroy me. I stood there like an idiot for 2 full seconds. Her eyes moved over my shirt, my face, the bottle in my hand. "You actually dressed up. This is just a shirt." "It is a good shirt." She stepped aside and let me in. The house smelled like garlic and herbs and something roasting in the oven. The kitchen table was set with 2 plates, real napkins, a candle in the center. A jazz record played low from somewhere near the window. Nothing about it said casual, no matter how either of us might have tried to pretend otherwise. She handed me a glass of wine and said dinner needed another 20 minutes. I told her I had waited longer for worse things. That earned me a look over the rim of her own glass. "Careful, Jake. I am trying." "No," she said quietly. "You are not." She was right. Dinner was roasted chicken and vegetables and bread from the bakery down the street. We ate slowly, talked easily, and did not pretend there was not a different kind of current in the room now. I asked about her client from Wednesday. She told me she had landed 2 extra properties off that one meeting. I told her she should be proud. She said she was learning how to be. At one point her phone lit up on the counter. She looked at it, then turned back to me. "Robert." I asked. She nodded once. "You going to answer?" "No." That one word warmed something in my chest. After dinner we took the wine to the back porch. She had hung a simple strand of lights along the edge since the last time I was there. Soft, warm light, nothing flashy, just enough to make the porch feel like a place built for staying. We sat on the wooden bench this time, closer than before. Not touching. Not yet. She told me more that night than she had before. Not just the outline of her marriage, the shape of it, the gradual way she had learned to shrink, the small decisions she stopped making because it was easier than being corrected. The afternoon she looked in the mirror and realized she could not remember the last thing she had done simply because it pleased her. I listened. When she stopped, she looked almost surprised at herself. "You are very easy to talk to," she said. "It is inconvenient." I smiled. "I can be more difficult if that helps." She laughed then, a full laugh, head tipping back slightly, real enough that I wanted to be the reason for it again. Then she got quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before something, not after. She was looking out at the yard when she said, "I have not let myself want something in a long time. It felt safer not to." I turned toward her. "And now?" She looked at me then, directly. No shield, no softening. "Now I am tired of safe." I reached for her hand slowly. Gave her every chance to pull away. She did not. Our fingers fit together so naturally it felt almost unfair. I leaned in and kissed her. Not hard, not reckless, just honest, steady, certain, like something that had been moving toward this from the first glass of sweet tea and had finally stopped pretending it was headed anywhere else. She kissed me back with that same certainty. When we pulled apart, she stayed close enough that her shoulder rested against mine. "Becca is going to have opinions. Probably. My ex-husband is going to have worse. Let him." She was quiet for a second, then asked, "You are really not scared off by any of this?" I looked at her, at the woman who had opened the door in a silk robe and somehow still turned out to be the least careless person I had met in years. At the woman who built businesses and repainted rooms and kept moving forward even after people had spent years trying to narrow her life down to what suited them. "Not even a little," I said. She laced her fingers through mine and leaned her head against my shoulder. We sat there like that for a long time while the record played softly through the cracked kitchen window and the night settled around us. Months later. The back gate never stuck again because I replaced the whole frame on a Sunday while Lynn sat in a lawn chair with coffee, and the kind of supervisor voice I found both annoying and unfairly attractive. Becca did have opinions, many of them, though even she eventually admitted she had not seen her mother this settled in years. Robert called twice after that, and both times Lynn let it go to voicemail. Her lawyer handled the account. Her life handled the rest. And on a Thursday evening months after a cardboard box brought me to that porch, I stood in Lynn Turner's kitchen making grilled cheese while she laughed so hard she nearly burned the first side. She opened the window when the smoke rose, and I took the spatula from her hand and finished the job. She stood beside me, shoulder brushing mine, and told me I was not as useless as she first assumed. I told her I was glad she gave me the chance to prove it. She smiled and bumped my shoulder again. Me too. Outside, the porch light I had fixed that first night glowed steady over the front steps. No flicker, no loose wire, just a simple, reliable light doing exactly what it was supposed to do. Some things, once you fix them right, stay that way.